Here we are.
Everybody's here. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's 7:30. We're going to begin our meeting today. We're going to be meeting on human resources and facilities and finances. But we'd like to open up the meeting first with public comment. If anybody is here, they can stand and join us at the podium. But I think we're just a solo crowd today, so I think we can just go ahead and get started then. If there's nobody out there. We'll kick it off actually with human resources since it's a fairly short part of the agenda, and then we can get into the other.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks.
Today for good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody back.
Morning.
Today for the Human Resources Committee, we do just have two standard items that we do have every month, the administrative and certified employment recommendations, as well as the buildings and grounds, classified non-contractual and paraeducator employment recommendations. I'll refer to them as the certified and the classified rather than going through the full name for each one. But moving forward on page 54, we do have the administrative and certified employment recommendations. Just a little background before we get into some of the names. Our current instructional FTE for 21-22 is at 254.3 FTE. That is 1.0 higher than what the board approved in March, but that 1.0 is by way of the LT Academy that was approved back in June. So there hasn't been any need to increase the number of instructional sections from when we began the process with the Board of Education in March until now, and we still have the 0.4 discretionary FTE available should we see an influx in registrations or some shifting registrations between now and the start of school next week. We're not anticipating that, but we at the same time, we don't want to shut the door to that possibility as well too. So we do have that. Division chairs are always on the lookout, monitoring their classes to see if any of those changes need to be made. If there are any changes that need to be made, including ones that would affect the discretionary or go beyond, we would obviously make the board aware of that. If it's discretionary, it wouldn't come to the board for formal approval, as that has already been approved. It would be more of us notifying the board that we've utilized it. But if we have to go beyond that, we would certainly come to the Board of Education with a request to add additional FTE at that time. And given the timing that our board meeting is on August 16th and students don't actually start until a few days later, it may be that we have that formal request come in September. If that's the case, I would work with Dr. Waterman and then work with the board as well to make sure the board is aware of that. We wouldn't want to wait until that September board meeting to necessarily open up a section if we needed to go beyond the discretionary. So we'll work through all of those on a case-by-case basis as that happens. On page 54, you will see a lot of names, and that is not typical for most months for certified, but it is typical at the beginning of the school year, really from April through the beginning of the school year as we continue to bring new staff on. All of the names on this recommendation are either for existing FTE that for certified staff or instructional that were created by way of vacancies for resignations, retirements, or growth. And we also have, and we're excited to have a recommendation for 3 administrative positions today that will go to the board for the full recommendation and approval if the board approves on Monday night. Those would be for the 2 new administrative positions that the board approved in June, the Director of Student Services, as well as the Director of Equity and Belonging. We're excited that we've screened candidates, interviewed candidates, and selected candidates for both of those positions. As you notice in the materials on page 54, our recommendation for the position of Director of Student Services is an existing LT administrator. It's Leslie Owens, who is currently our division chair for Student Services. With her recommendation into the director role, that then opens up a vacancy in the current role that she's in. Because of the similarities in names, we changed the name slightly to be division chair for counseling and student support services, just to differentiate those names a little bit. But you'll also see that we have a recommendation for Drew Eater to fill her position. So we are excited that we were able to get all of those positions filled. And then last but certainly not least, we are making the recommendation to bring on Jennifer Rowe in our Director of Equity and Belonging position as well. And so we are working with her to determine a start date. We are anticipating the end of August, beginning of September for her to begin with us once she notifies her, or not notifies, but works through her own school district and has the formal board approval here. But we're very excited. So we know within our certified staff, We are ready to go for the start of the school year as of right now. We're still working through some long-term sub positions, and we'll continue to work through those as they come on. But all of the positions that we know were vacancies or growth positions, we do have filled at this time. So we're very thankful, and thanks to the board for all of your support with that. Thanks to all of the division chairs and everyone who was part of that process. It's certainly a large undertaking, and everyone chips in to do that. So thank you very much. I also did want to make note of the fact that we do have 3 certified staff members who have notified us of their intent to retire in subsequent or in later years, including our Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Scott Eggerding, who notified us he'll be retiring in 4 years. So while it's 4 years away for Scott and for a couple of other people, and they're certainly not leaving us today, we do wish them nothing but the best in the future, and hope that these are strong 4 years, and we're excited to have them with us while we can, but excited for them in the future as well too. Are there any questions regarding the certified employment recommendations for August? Okay. Then moving on to the classified staff. Again, the classified staff memo, typically you will see more names on the classified staff memo than you would on the certified staff throughout the year, and that's generally because this is where we are hiring people within our buildings and grounds, classified, non-contractual, and paraeducator work group, where it's a little bit more of a dynamic work year, where people will be coming on and exiting at various points. Typically, you will see this list be the largest in August and September, as we do all of our new hiring for vacancies that occur over the summer, and this year is no exception. We are recommending the employment of 12 new classified staff members across all 3 of those work groups. And additionally, we are recommending the reemployment of 2 paraeducators who were released by way of the March 2021 release of first-year paraeducators back in March. As you recall, that is part of our contractual agreement with the paraeducators. All first-year paraeducators are released pending our knowledge of what student schedules will look like and the need for paraeducators. We did recall all 3. One wasn't able to join us back, so we have 2 that are coming back. And we'll continue to bring new paraeducators on. We still have vacancies within that, and we're working hard to fill those. So we anticipate having additional names, if not at the August 16th meeting with the revised memo, at the September meeting to have those as well too. Are there any questions regarding the classified employment recommendations?
Ed, for those vacancies that we fill, that is pretty common every year that we go through that.
It is pretty common. This year we do have more than we've had in the past, and we're seeing the same type of things that you're seeing when you see on the news in terms of help wanted and not as many applicants for certain positions. So we're reaching far and wide to talk to our colleagues to see if they have people that might be interested in. The LaGrange Chamber, or the West Suburban Chamber of Commerce, is holding a job fair at the Max next week that I will be attending to try to recruit and attract people to some of our positions as well too. And we're also reaching out to anyone who has expressed an interest in being a sub, to say maybe you might be interested in a full-time position with benefits as a paraeducator or in classified non-contractual or in some of our B&G jobs. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get that. But it has been more of a challenge this year than in previous years. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. Right. But typically every year, Carrie, we do see the need to hire lots of paraeducators. Specifically with the paraeducators, we do have a lot of paras that do have full teaching licenses. So it is not uncommon for them to find positions over the summer. And we know that going in. We took the approach many years ago that we'd rather have paraeducators, if we could, that had full-time teaching or full licenses, knowing that they might only be with us for a short amount of time because they've gone through the full teacher training and student teaching. This isn't diminishing the quality of work for people who don't have that, but we also know if they are in instructional roles, it's of benefit to have people with that license. And so with that also comes the possibility and probability in many cases that they're going to find teaching jobs at some point. Just yesterday at the new teacher breakfast at the country club, there were 3 or 4 paraeducators that used to work with us that are now teaching in other school districts or doing things. So it was great to see them, in other jobs. Obviously, we'd love to still have them, but we're excited for them in their certified roles as well. So we'll continue to work through those and just staff them one person at a time.
Right. And thank you for that. And then we'll just, and we do obviously, work our best to make sure we have that coverage for our students.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then just so everyone is aware, I am presenting to the new teachers over at South Campus. So at 8:30, I'm going to quietly get up and leave. I
Yeah.
don't want to be disrespectful. I just want everybody to.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I think a couple other people may have to check out at 8:30, so.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ed.
So,
Oh,
quick question,
yeah.
I'm sorry. So, I thought, that there were two student groups that, were applying for sponsorship, and does that come through the HR committee?
Are you talking regarding stipends?
And the
Yeah, so those would go through the stipend committee.
does that ultimately go through the?
It comes to the Board of Education if it is being recommended for compensation. So the process happens where it goes through the stipend committee. The stipend committee then makes a recommendation or determines whether or not that club can move forward in a pilot status. But then that is not something that operates through the Board of Education. But then once it operates in a pilot status, it gets re-reviewed by the stipend committee and then brought to the Board of Education for approval of that. That's what we met in, those were the items that we spoke about in June, Michael, where they were actually requesting to receive compensation for those roles.
Okay, I'm just wondering, because, I mean, I know that there, in the press, there's,
Sure.
articles out there about, and I don't know if that was from back 2 months ago, 3 months ago when it was denied, but then it's being resurfaced as if it was already like a decision that has just recently been made.
Yeah, no, there hasn't been a stipend committee meeting since the spring. We meet 4 times a year, once per quarter, and so there hasn't been a new stipend committee. I believe it was in May, right, Jill,
Yeah.
that we met last, so,
So
yeah.
it was
From
a few months
prior.
ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
So is there another one coming up then?
We will be having one in the first quarter of the school year. We're looking to, we haven't set a date yet, but
Okay.
we're looking for, once we get the school year kicked off, probably 3rd or 4th week of September.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just as long as we're talking about this, but, because I'm not sure, I was tracking with you, I heard you say Turning Point in the sailing club, but something has surfaced more recently or something?
It's just in the patch all over
In
the
the
place.
patch, okay, I
Yeah.
thought you said it, okay, gotcha, I didn't hear that. Or we have to get used to the
No, sorry.
muffled of the masks again. When we did talk about, the groups that are coming forward and asking for, sponsorship or to be a pilot, and I think it was in May or something like that, you had mentioned that you were revising some of the criteria and putting it, differently on the application sheet.
Yep.
And we had asked if you could bring that forward, and that would
Yeah,
still
we're
be
still,
great.
yeah, we absolutely will.
So, to have the opportunity to look at the criteria would be fantastic.
Just for a point of clarification, is it revising the criteria or just posting it in a more public place? I think that's what
Right,
it was.
my understanding was it was the posting of the
It's just the
criteria so they
posting.
could
The
see that.
criteria hasn't changed.
Correct.
It's always been the same. It's just putting it
Correct.
in a place where it's more visible for more people.
Correct.
Right. Which is great, because I don't think,
Right.
at this point,
Absolutely.
we've not seen the criteria. It sounds like there's a criteria that's been followed, historically and so forth, but I think part of your intent of putting it on the application form is to
Correct.
help any students or people coming forward to apply for that really understand how that is going, the decisions are going to be made.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Good?
Thank you,
All
everybody.
right. Thanks, Ed. We're excited for some new people, too.
We are too.
All right. We want to kick it off with financial
Finance,
component.
finance.
Money.
Yeah.
Money first, please.
It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
Sure does.
Take it away, Brian.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. Good to see everybody here today.
Good morning.
And so, we've all had some practice at this now, because back in May and June, as you recall, we adopted a tentative budget, a revised tentative budget, and then the final revised budget in June. And so, it's the exact same process as what we did then. The board would be asked to adopt a tentative budget at Monday night's meeting, and then the final in September. So keep in mind, of course, as we saw back then, also, this is a tentative budget, but I will tell you that I do a majority of the work here to try to keep this as is as we go forward. There may be some things that happen in the next month between now and September that may change this. As Ed talked about, if we have, we're adding a staff member or something along those lines, if I get something from the state of Illinois that says, revenues may be reduced or increased, those types of things can happen. And so we'll keep this obviously tentative as we go through. That being said, let's jump into what we have as far as the budget for this year. Let's just jump right into the numbers. For the FY22 budget, we're looking at revenues of roughly $86 million, and we're looking at expenditures of almost $86.7 million. So there is a bit of a deficit there, but we'll talk through that and why that's there shortly. Now, beginning on page 3, I'm just going to touch on a couple of points here that the highlights that I have for you there. First of all, major operating revenues are anticipated to go up about 6.6%, which is about $5 million. Really, there's a couple reasons for that. $2.4 million from our property taxes, which was an increase in both on existing properties and on new property. New property actually came in quite a bit higher than what we had originally budgeted. Usually we budget about 20 to 25 million, and we were right at $42 million. So that's a good number. I think a lot of that is attributable to the old Masonic property there, where we have the new homes, and so that was a nice boost for us. A couple of other pieces there, as you may recall, we had the student technology fee, which we're anticipating about $525,000 worth of new revenue from that. And then there are federal monies of roughly $1.2 million included in this budget, the ESSER monies, and then also a potential grant from the state of Illinois for $1 million. So those last two, that $2.2 million, those aren't long-term influxes of cash. Those are kind of one-year types of things, and then those will go away. We'll talk about what we have those budgeted for as well. Just kind of jumping down the page, about middle of the page there, district relies heavily on local property taxes and other local sources of revenue. Roughly 91% of all of our revenue comes from local sources. That's property taxes, corporate personal property taxes, student fees, those types of things. And so really, we, as you can see, heavily reliant upon those. It's not the case in all districts. There are districts in the state of Illinois that rely much more heavily on state funding than not. And so we're clearly in a position of relying mostly on our local sources of revenue. I kind of touched on, as I talked about, the state revenues are estimated to be about the same as they were last year, with the exception of this $1 million grant from the state of Illinois that would be for capital projects, and we'll talk about that just in a little bit. Again, the ESSER monies, the federal monies, also one-time infusions of cash that we're going to use. We have a lot of that budgeted for capital projects as well. Scott does have some other requirements that have to go to curriculum pieces, but the majority of that is going to go to the capital projects, as we'll talk about. The one real difference that we're going to see this year is in the interest income line, and there's a reason for that. As you recall, effective July 1st, we left the jurisdiction of the Lyons Township School Treasurer's Office. And so really what ends up happening at that point is we received a large sum of cash, of course, that belongs to the district. But the issue with that, as far as interest income for this coming year goes, there's really two pieces to that. Number one, interest rates on the available investments to us aren't very good. And number two, we don't have any sort of a portfolio right now. We're working on putting that together. But the problem is there are no long-term investments, midterm or short-term investments right now that are going to bring us any sort of large dollars in terms of investments. That will change as we go through time. So just to give you a quick example, we put together a cash flow. We look at what dollars we have available to invest, whether those are short, midterm, or long-range, investments. And so when you look at any given year, for example, let's say in the next month we buy some CDs that are 2 years, right? Well, that's not going to, we're going to get a better interest rate long-term on those, but that's not going to affect, the maturity is going to be 2 years from now. So that will affect a budget that's 2 years from now. And so there's going to be this rolling on effect as we go. And of course, the thought process would be as we get to, maybe 3 years in, we'll start to see some obviously good returns at that particular point. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. We are working on that, but there's really not a whole lot we're going to be able to do with that this year, other than establish the portfolio I will have a report for everybody as for the board as we go through that, establishing that portfolio. But again, we may be out 5 years with some of our investments because it makes sense to do so. None of those are going to mature this year and affect this budget. So as we get through time, we'll see some changes in that. It's still not a mistake to do what we've done, just so everybody knows. That's not the issue here at all. It's just a matter of resetting and moving on. Quite honestly, in this budget, one of the bulleted points for the expenditures is that there's $375,000 that we still will owe for last year to the Township Treasurer's Office, because they always bill us a year in arrears. And so next year, even if the interest earnings still aren't what they used to be, and they probably won't be, there's almost $400,000 we knock off an expense right then and there. So we're moving in the right direction, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to get there. Any questions on the revenue side at all?
So when do you have the report, when do you expect to have the report for the portfolio?
So probably, my guess is we would have something at the end of September, maybe the October board meeting would be the goal, because the board policy says, I believe if I remember correctly, quarterly reports on those items. So we would look to have something probably through September, so it would be into October for the board.
And this is just because I don't know this being new, but who picks those?
Good question. So I'm currently working with a company called PMA,
Okay.
okay? And they are an...
Outside company picks that, just not you.
No, there's really a couple
a
of
lot of
parts to that.
questions.
We have input and they have input. So, they may say, hey, look, here's looks like a really attractive investment for us, right? We may agree with that, we may disagree with that. But they are an investment service, and so we have some say in it, and they, of course, have. They don't make the final decision, they make the recommendations, and then we say, yeah, we're gonna purchase that, or no, we want to look to do something else.
When you say we, who do you mean by we?
Talking about myself,
Okay,
so that would be it,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
And is it fair to maybe remind that the investment requirements are pretty stringent? And we
They are.
can't be in speculative equities
Right.
or
That's right.
derivatives of.
There is no stock market here.
Yeah.
There is.
I imagine it's pretty,
Right, level set
all pretty
that,
conservative.
exactly.
All
Yeah,
pretty conservative.
Yes.
the public funds, the
You're not
public
making
funds.
Good
like-
reason.
Right, exactly.
not going to
exactly.
Vegas, is what you're
No,
saying?
none of that's happening.
Okay.
The Public Funds Investment Act limits, and basically says, look, the safety of the principal is of the utmost importance compared to the return on investment. So when we go out with whatever investment it is, typically we're looking at CDs, treasury notes, money market accounts, of course. By the way, all of our money currently is invested in a money market account. So it is earning something. It's not great, but it is earning something. And again, we'll change that as we go. We do have the ability to purchase bonds for municipalities, school districts, those types of things. So those are some of the investments, but really that's what we're limited to.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for explaining.
Sure,
Thank you.
no problem.
And Brian, real quick, with the timing that you described with some of these longer dated CDs, for example, are you referring more to the cash basis kind of accounting where we won't be able to utilize
That's right.
the interest earned on that until the end of the 2-year period? But along the way, do you record not to get too technical, but the accrual side of that? Or is it more of a cash basis view when it comes to interest income?
Unless it's an investment that is going to pay us as we go.
Okay, so
Right.
it's more cash
Then
basis.
right, exactly. So then we would record those, bond, for example, if you buy a bond, you would see, it would be a 5-year sort of bond, but you would have monies that you would accumulate over those 5 years, so you record those. A CD, for example, is going to be, it's a flat dollar amount that you're going to receive as, at the end of the term, and so you would not record or be able to use any of that money until the maturity.
And you and PMA would be looking to get into some sort of laddering.
That's right.
Or cadence, so at some point we have some annual cash coming in from the timed out maturities on these investments. But we're starting from kind of year or day zero.
That's right.
On July 1.
Yeah.
And that's the reason for that. Okay.
That's exactly right. And that laddering is the part we don't have.
Right.
We will, but as we ladder out, sure, we'll buy those investments, but they're not going to mature for maybe 2-3 years from now, 4 years, 5 years. And so as we do that, we'll have that income back. But again, don't take that as what we did as a mistake, because that's not the case at all.
It's a timing issue.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
Exactly right.
Great.
Okay, any additional questions on the revenue side? If not, we'll jump over quickly to the expenditures. Just as I mentioned here in these bullet points, comparing this year's budget to last year's budget is really kind of not a good comparison,
Yeah.
okay? There were several $1 million worth of expenditures that we had planned for that never happened last year. And so when you first jump out and you look at the first bullet point there, you say, wow, expenditures are up $10.2 million, and it's 13.4%. What's going on here? Part of that, and a good portion of that, is because there were expenses last year that we did not have. And just a couple of them again that jump out. Food service, typically $1 million to $1.2 million. Didn't have that one last year, in that range. Transportation, we're probably down $1.8 million to $2 million. So factor those back in. The other part of that is that I have roughly $4 million that's sitting in the O&M fund right now for projects for next summer. That's unallocated. Typically, we don't have $4 million in there, but because of the grants, because of the potential to spend some of the reserve, as we talked about at I think June, right?
Yeah.
So I have $4 million sitting there that normally we would have about $1 million to $1.5 million that we would typically have. So that really jumps this whole thing up quite a bit as well. So I don't want anybody to look at this and go, oh my God, we've gone off the rails and we're spending all the money. That's not what's happening here. It's really a combination of the majority of those two things there. So I have some bulleted points here when we're looking at, salaries again, 5.7%, $2.7 million. Again, there were salaries we did not spend, money on last year that we anticipate, bringing those back. And assuming that it's a normal school year, we would see those expenditures again this year. The top bullet point on page 4, I just quickly want to take a minute and talk to everybody about this, because this is the one area where if, let me take a step back. This is the one area where there's uncertainty, probably the most uncertainty in our budget. And the reason that is the case is because this deals with medical benefits for the employees. And so we are self-insured. And so what that means is that we pay claims. We don't pay premium. So let me give you an example of that. Your homeowner's insurance, you pay the premium, right? $3,000, cover your house for the year, bang, that's it, you're done. On the reverse of that is what we do. We actually pay the claims. We collect, a portion from the employees. We set what looks like a premium in place with our actuary and our broker, and then we collect based on those numbers. And of course, I'm simplifying it, but they certainly give us the help of saying, okay, here's what we anticipate, here's what you would expect. The reality is that I could budget for $6 million of cost to the board for this year. That could be $5 million in the end. That could be $7 million in the end. It just simply is kind of what's going to happen in this current year with the medical insurance. Of course, you take into consideration medical trend. We're also looking at right now the fact that there was the potential over the last year and a half that people have actually put off surgeries because of the pandemic. And now they're going to maybe jump back into those. We don't know, but we're anticipating roughly a $500,000 increase to those medical benefits for this coming year. And again, that's actually not all that uncommon for us to see something along those lines. And then we adjust the rates as we go, and we try to keep that number down as much as we can. But nonetheless, this is where the true uncertainty lies, simply because we are making an educated guess. But at the end, it may or may not actually be any of those numbers that we looked at.
So Brian, is this typical what you budget for then? This type of increase?
That's right.
Every year you
That's
budget?
right.
So
Yeah.
it's not that you're budgeting more this year because of COVID? but
No.
This is the typical, okay,
Yeah, this is a fairly typical type of increase that, what we would see.
per year.
We've gone, I think in the past, since I've been here, we've gone as high as probably close to $1 million increase. But that's generally, from what I've seen when I've been here, it's generally unlikely. This is more in the range. We're probably $400,000 to $700,000 increase on an annual basis.
Okay.
And then again, you never know. That may materialize and it may not.
Right.
It may be $1 million when we're all said and done.
Right.
So that's, like I said, where the uncertainty lies. Again, another number that jumps out at you here when you first of all you look at the salaries and benefits account for 72% of our total expenses. That's exactly in line with every other school district in the state of Illinois. That's how it goes. And so you look at that number and say, wow, that's a lot. It is, but it's also right in line
we
with every other school district. Doesn't matter the number, the percentage is about, right where all the other districts are. Again, another number to look at here, purchase services, 47%. You say, wow, what's going on here? Again, transportation, that's a purchase service. The food service, so right there you have around $3 million worth of money that we're adding back into the budget that we had expected to spend last year that we didn't, and so that should be coming back online, hopefully, this year. So anyway, again, another quick bullet point there, $375,000 for the treasurer's office, as you see. So this is the last year that will happen. We'll pay that, and then we'll be done with that. Capital expenditures, let's just quickly talk about these. So we have equipment and building renovations. So we have roughly $5.5 million in there as far as capital expense goes. And so kind of the breakout of that is roughly $4 million is set aside for those projects that we talked about. And we'll talk about those again here in just a little bit. And again, that $4 million, it's actually $4.3 million, but we owe $300,000 from our projects that began in June. So quickly, let me just kind of talk through that. What happens here is, on any given summer, when we start projects, the first month of June is paid in the prior fiscal year. We cross the July 1st threshold, and then those same projects, the second, well, actually almost 2/3 of those projects, are then paid in the next fiscal year. So you straddle those fiscal years, and so I have to budget appropriately for that. So of this $4 million that's sitting here, that's roughly 35% of what we think we would be paying out in that fiscal year for those projects. And then the rest would get kicked into the next year. So just so you understand, you have that concept when we talk through that on the projects coming up. And then we also have, as I had mentioned before, there's roughly $2 million on the revenue side to cover those $4 million. It's not all of the money, but the reason it's not all of the money is because all of the expense isn't going to hit this fiscal year. Some of it will hit the next year. We'll claim that for the grant, and then the reimbursement will come into that following year. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. Great. Any questions on any of that? And as I mentioned here, while the current budget is not balanced, we do not need to provide a reduction plan in the state of Illinois because we have plenty of money to cover it. And we also know that this is based on some numbers right now that, as far as we don't have any bid numbers back for these projects, so we have some estimates here, but we don't really know what they look like. We get some bids, we would come back and take a look at those again. That being said, just quickly, page 5 gives you a quick summary of what the FY22, the tentative budget looks like, and it breaks it down by certain categories, objects there for you, so you can take a look at those. And then the total summary there on the far right-hand side. Page 6 and 7 are those cash dollars that I talked to you about from last year versus this year. Please also remember that while these numbers are skewed, our fiscal year FY21 is still open. It'll be open through the end of August. We'll go through the auditing process. There will be auditing adjustments that are made to these particular numbers. So these are unaudited numbers yet, but they're cash numbers. So you can take a look at those and get an idea. Are we going to be wildly different from these? Probably not, but nonetheless, there will be some changes to it. So when we see that final information, it'll look different. And then finally, beginning on page 8, you see the official state budget form, the 5036 form as it's called, and that's where all of that information that I just sort of summarized for you resides. And so, that being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions, any additional questions on it for you at all. Okay?
Very thorough.
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. So hearing none on that, I think then we'll go forward to a couple of other quick topics here that we want to kind of get through fairly quickly. The first one, I'm sorry, the board would be asked to adopt the tentative budget then Monday night.
Yep.
Yes.
And then again, that same process. We'll post it on the website. We will advertise, we're required to advertise in the newspaper. We have a public hearing for September, and then we adopt the final in September. I will let you know if any changes are made from this to the September form. It is possible, but again, I really put a lot of work into this so we get it pretty in some pretty good shape here, so that we're not, all of a sudden there's a $5 million difference. That should not be happening in my opinion. So, okay, great. So let's go on to the second topic here, and this, we're back to our transportation discussion. We've been talking with, let me jump back here. As you recall, we had some contract amendment language with First Student, where they were asking us, still are, to, pay some dollar amount to them in the event that we are out of school for some extended period of time. So anything after a week, according to their contract, we would continue to pay them. We would pay them at either 80% or 40% level of regular routes. So the regular routes simply means that those are our morning routes and our afternoon routes. It doesn't include what they call the charters, which are for athletics, any of those types of things. And so I've gone back and forth with Jason Kerna, who is our regional representative there from First Student. And as he and I have talked about it, there is, I think, some value in this. I don't think it's a great setup. I really don't. We'll leave it at that. That being said, they're in a position where the reason they're asking us to do this is because if in fact we were to have to leave for 2 months this year, right? They're basically saying, look, we're gonna have to lay our drivers off if we don't have the money to pay them. And if we do that, we can't guarantee that we're gonna have drivers that are gonna be back when you decide after the 2 months that you wanna come back to school, that we're gonna have the drivers to provide the service. So especially in light of job market right now, and what's going on out there is, I think that you probably have seen, you can go anywhere, pretty much at any point now, and see help wanted signs. We've been in conversation with them, and also Grand Prairie, which is our special education transportation company. They're having an extremely hard time finding drivers right now to even run our regular routes for the start of the school year. They're making modifications at this point. We've been talking with them really on an almost, I don't want to say every other day basis, but it's been probably every 3 to 4 days. They're making modifications within the company to even provide the service that we have right now. They think that they're going to be able to do it, and when I say think, I think we're probably at a 90% confidence level on that, which is good. But they're having a hard time, hiring and then retaining drivers. They lost a number of drivers from last year. Quite frankly, I think there's a lot of people who look at the potential risk of driving a bus with 30 or 40, 50 students on it and say, I'm not interested in taking that risk. And so they're not doing it. So that being said, I think there's some value in this. I don't like it from a financial perspective, I will tell you that. But I think the value is really the best interest of our students. We still have the ability to say, look, we can pay you 80% or 40%, which is what the contract says. If it's 80%, they will retain the drivers, keep them on the payroll, and keep paying them. If it's 40%, they're saying, look, we can keep the buses, because they would say that they talked about potentially reallocating the buses to other areas if they're still in school and all that sort of thing. Granted, they can get those back, but so that would be buses, overhead, those types of things. But it's really that 80% number that is, what they're kind of looking for. And again, as I said, I'm not happy with this arrangement, but I think it's probably in the best interest of our students to move forward with this. I did ask them, and he did agree. He sent me the contract language after this. I asked him if they would be willing to, and again, we went round and round about this. I asked him, I said, just take this out of here. No, and then I listened to him, listened to what he had to say about all that, right? And we went through all that. He did concede to say, look, I asked him, I said, a lot of times you put language in an amendment or a contract and then it stays forever. I said, look, can you at least give us the language that says this is for this year only? And then after that, we'll come back and renegotiate it so that it's not just out there forever. And then they start wanting to say, well, look, you had 3 days off for snow days, so we want to get paid for those now, all of that type of thing, right? So he did agree to that. He sent me a copy of the language. I'll have that updated language for you for the board meeting. But at this point, my recommendation is to move forward with it, with the language, with the change language that we would have at Monday's board meeting. And then, look, we'll see what this year brings. I don't know if hopefully we're gonna be in all year long. That's the goal. We really were last year, with the exception of Wednesdays, starting in October. So really that would not have applied here. But, obviously the last year and a half has brought some really strange times for us. So, again, that being said, that's my recommendation here. So I would recommend to the board that we approve this amendment with that revised language. And again, I'll be happy to answer any questions on that from anybody.
Brian, this contract seems to be last year's amendment contract,
Yeah,
is
I
that
saw
right? Yeah,
No, you know what, he put the wrong dates on there.
okay.
Yeah, he put, because that clause number 2 down there, that disasters and emergencies.
Yeah.
That was not in last year's contract.
It was not?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay,
Because
so
that's the
he's
one that
just-
has, yeah, I'll,
Okay.
I did see that, and I'll make sure that he revised
Yeah,
it.
these dates looked a
Yeah.
little off. Right at the
Yeah.
top.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, those are the wrong dates. So
Okay.
For 21, 22.
And we'll get that with our board packet then.
Yes,
Okay.
I'll give you the updated
Okay.
contract language.
The original contract that we negotiated with them, it was from November 1st, 2005, is that right? And I'm only picking that up because there was something in here that talks about the amendment dates,
You know
or
what?
maybe from the June meeting. Oh, yeah, and the whereas section,
Right,
it talks about an agreement dated November 1st, 2005.
right.
So we haven't really entered into a formal agreement with them in a lot of years, but we're just doing amendments each year, is that
So,
it?
yes, so the contract remains in place, and then we have an amendment for the years subsequent to that. That's right.
Okay. Because I know in the June meeting, you talked about, like, and Jill, you had a lot of questions in the June meeting about, where's our negotiating power? How do we, can we cap increases somehow? Can we, if we're gonna, go ahead and agree to this 80%, these terms,
Yep.
what are they doing back for us? And I get it, we want to secure the transportation for our students. We hope and expect that we'll be in school all year, and at that case, we're dealing with a 4.9% increase, which sounds like it's pretty customary. But where is the give back to protect us from this sliding scale of increases every year?
I had multiple conversations with Jason about that. His concern in locking into some increase 2 years from now, at 2% or 3%, is the same as what it is right now, and that is, he doesn't know what the job market is going to look like. And so what he's basically saying is, look, I may have to up my starting salary 2 or 3 years from now from $20 to $25 an hour. That sounds extreme, probably is. I'm just kind of making it up for purposes of discussion. And he's saying, look, I don't know if I can't really commit to that because I don't know what the future holds for that, for this job market right now. And so he's very hesitant, obviously, and doesn't really want to do that. You asked about our negotiating power. We don't really have a ton of negotiating power here. The situation is such that, and I think that we kind of talked about this back in June, maybe it was either May or June, that if we were to go to bid for this contract, right, which we could do, I strongly suspect that we would have one bidder. And the one bidder would be First Student. And First Student could potentially, they kind of know this information too, right? They could come back and say, well, hey, we're going to bid this, we're going to be the only bidder, we're going to be the low bidder, but we're going to take a 15% increase on top of that. So it's not the greatest position to be in. I agree with you.
So is that why we retain this contract from 2005 and not try to negotiate a new one forward? Because
That's
of
right.
the concern that
Yeah.
we're not going to see a 4.9, but we're going to see triple that.
We could.
And then, okay.
Yeah, what's happened with other districts is they have gone to bid. There used to be a larger number of transportation companies, both regional and smaller carriers. A lot of them have been bought up, and they now it's sort of that, you have these groups, Illinois Cook, First Student, they've kind of territorialized themselves. And it would be very difficult, even for me to believe that another transportation company could come in here, underbid First Student with the startup costs that they would have. We run anywhere from, typically we're running 36 buses in the morning for our morning routes, right? 32 in the afternoon, but that's because then we have the athletics, and then they go home on different buses and that sort of thing. But 36 buses at, $80,000 to $100,000 a bus, you're talking about a $3.6 million startup cost, somewhere in that ballpark. That's without even salaries and benefits, right? You're talking about acquiring property in the district, setting up a facility. I think it would be very difficult, and I pretty much know that it would be very difficult for somebody to come in and undercut them. And that's essentially what has happened with a lot of other districts. They've gone out to bid, they get the incumbent as a low bidder, and the increase is 15%.
Back in the June meeting, and that makes sense, I mean, and I can see why you're kind of safeguarding the situation.
Yeah.
In the June meeting, there was some discussion, and I wasn't at the June meeting, but listened to it, and there was some discussion about what is market, and Tim at that point had said that he would reach out to Grand Prairie, Kicker, and some other school districts and find out, to determine if we are at market. Do you know was that determined?
But I can tell you that I had the conversation with Tim about it as well. And there is, every year, the West Suburban High School, some of the West Suburban High School districts, we get together and we have a transportation survey. And we look at what people are paying as far as a daily route rate goes.
Yeah.
Our route rate is one of the lowest in the area. And the reason that occurs is because our buses pair with many of our elementary districts.
Right.
So in the morning, in particular, our routes are shared. So they'll send a bus out for LT, right? We have the earliest pickup because we have the earliest start time, which is one of the considerations when we talked about, the start time. So they drop our students off, 7:30, 7:20, whatever, and then they can go back out and run other routes for the elementary districts. So that pairing saves us a decent amount of money. And like I said, when I talk with my colleagues at the other districts, every year they look at our number compared to theirs, like, how do you do that? I said, well, it's because of the pairing that we have with the elementary districts. So.
And are the elementary districts getting the same type of language in their
They
agreements,
are.
do you know?
They are.
The same type of increases and so forth, so
They
that's
are,
consistent?
that's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, the only other question I had from, the June meeting to now is, the conversation that had, and Jill had a lot of questions about, well, like, what if we did have our own fleet? And there was talk of putting together some rough numbers, some spitballing numbers. Were you guys able to do that?
I have not had much of an opportunity with the other things that were going on this summer to do
Just
that.
slightly busy.
It was a little bit, yeah. I can tell you, I started to kind of put some numbers together. And I'll kind of repeat what I said before. Typically, the benefit of running your own transportation is that you make the schedule. You do what you want to do when you
Right.
want to do it. The problem is it typically costs you, I'll say quite a bit more, but it'll definitely cost you more usually to run your own transportation than what it does to be contracted. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, we have the same issues that we just talked about that any other company would have, right? If we need to go out and buy 40 buses, which we would, at $80,000 to $100,000 a bus, you're talking about anywhere from, 40, right? So you're looking at maybe $4 million worth of buses, right? Anywhere from $3.8 to $4 million worth of buses. Even if you depreciate that cost over 5 years, which you probably would, and say, okay, look, you're going to take the cost here, but you look at, that's roughly $650,000 a year in bus costs alone. And that doesn't go away once you buy the buses, because buses take a beating. And you can have a bus for 5, 6, 7 years. The bus has 50,000 miles on it, and most people say, well, if my car had 50,000 miles on it in 7 years, that'd be great. I'd keep it for another 8 years. The problem with the school bus is you start and stop every 300, 400, 500 feet, right? And so the transmissions take a beating. The buses themselves, so that cost starts to roll on an annual basis, because now you're replacing. You can't just every 6, 7 years replace 40 buses. It doesn't, that's not the best way to do it. So now you have to start rolling buses. You have a cost associated with that. You have salaries, benefits, all of those things, that are wound up into this. Plus, you're adding personnel, right? You're adding a transportation, some sort of, I don't know if it's a director or a supervisor of transportation. You're adding probably 40 drivers, because you need those drivers plus substitutes. You're adding mechanics. You're adding a facility of which, you're going to maintain the buses, all those types of things. So I would venture to say, based on what I had initially kind of looked at, that we would definitely be paying more for this. Now, that's not to say I can still kind of grab something and put something together to say, look, this is what we would expect with costs. And look, here's the other issue. the issue that the transportation companies are facing right now, the shortage of labor, why would we be any different?
Right.
You know, so really, we've taken that risk of, you know, the shortage of labor, and now we've taken on that burden, and, you know, Ed would have to find, you know,
Right, yeah. probably
30 bus
not
drivers
the
or
best
whatever the
time
case
to
may
do
be.
something like that,
yeah.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think that's something, if the board is interested in seeing like a one-pager for September, that's just a decision the board would need to make.
Well,
I
mean,
really don't.
I don't
wanna
think,
Okay.
yeah, I don't
waste
think we
it.
can
There you
go
go.
there right now.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
not a
that's
waste
fair.
of time, but I
It's-
don't wanna use your time that way right now. I
That
feel
is-
like
That
we've got other
was a
things.
question.
And it would
Yep.
take a lot of
It's not
time
our
to,
business.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
we
I-
couldn't execute this in August, right, buying
No.
money, even if we had started in, when the question came up. I think, and I appreciate your point that the new contract isn't as financially attractive as it was before,
Right.
but in no way are we losing money.
Right.
Is that fair to say? This is, I think of this, and someone may have raised this, as more of an insurance contract.
Right.
And if I had to think about, you know, what if first student had come back a month ago and said, you know, we can't find anybody to drive these buses, your kids are gonna have to all walk.
Yeah.
Or you're gonna have to go with another I mean,
Right.
this situation can be far worse, I think, than it is. I appreciate that it's a little tenuous and we kind of need them and they kind of need us, and that doesn't feel as good as, you know, getting 3 bids on some concrete work, but it's not, it doesn't sound like a terrible contract, and again, we're not at risk of losing money. We're just we're not gonna benefit, like, let's be frank, as we did
Right.
recently, to the tune of, what was it, $1.7 million, and thank you,
So Brian,
Technology One-to-One program. I mean, so I don't think it's a terrible contract, and I don't think investigating, bringing all of this and risk and insurance and all those employees in-house makes a lot of sense. And I remember we did talk about these 1-year extensions. I was curious, why are they only 1 year? But that also kind of protects us too. If we did, you know, have a year with terrible feedback on the bus company or something like that, where we really can make a different decision. It just doesn't sound like it feels appropriate at this point.
Yeah, the unfortunate part about that is that we have said, look, we're gonna kind of keep rolling this over as we go, right? The transportation technically could send us a letter requesting us to go to bid. And if they do that, we would have no choice, according to the law in the state of Illinois. And so, hopefully, they're not gonna do that, because that would also open this up to, you know, again, I think we're only open to one vendor at that point, I really do. And again, I get it, that's not a great position, it's
Yeah.
really not. But, and to Julie's point too, the other piece of this is that, you know, look, I'd be hard pressed to say that we're saving money on this, right? Because that's not really what's going on. But these costs are only on the regular routes. So the 80 or 40%. So we're still saving 20%, even if we gave them 80, we're still saving 20. And we're not paying them for any of those other, you know, sporting functions, the sporting events, the club events where we're using their transportation, that sort of thing. And usually that's several $100,000 a year. So, so I'm trying to put a good spin on it. I get it, it's not the best, but
We appreciate
not-
all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
negotiations,
No.
Thank you.
because I know that's really a tough give and take. So appreciate your negotiations, and I, you know, it's not the best thing ever, but it is what we have right now, so thank you.
Are we
and-
making a decision on whether it's 80 or 40
no.
as part of this?
No,
No, just,
well,
it's written in the contract.
It's in
that
the
we need it.
contract. If in
Okay.
fact we came to a point this year where we said,
Right.
look, we're gonna be out,
Right.
I'm gonna make this up, this is not true. But if we were gonna be out for 2 months because we had to take a break because of the pandemic,
Sure.
Brian and I would talk with First Student, talk to them and see what we could come up with.
Yep,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and agree, thank you, thanks for the elaboration too, about, like, if we were to run our own fleet, because, I mean, it sounds like with what you're describing, my initial thought was like, well, we may have a upfront outlay, but that we would recoup over time and we would end up saving money. What you're describing is that utilizing these purchase services is not, we would not even come close to saving money.
Right.
But I think it's important to evaluate that, you know, or to have this discussion to make sure that, you know, we are considering all sources. And so thank you, again, for all the thoroughness
Sure.
and efforts.
Sure.
Thanks.
All right, so we would just ask the board then to approve that amendment on Monday night.
The right dates.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll get the right
Great,
dates in there.
thanks.
Yeah. Okay, moving on, this is just a quick item here, at least I think it should be a quick item. This is a resolution that once every 3 years in line with the triennials in Cook County. So the triennials means it's how they assess property, right? So they They do the north side of Cook County 1 year, then they do the city of Chicago, then they do the south side. And then in between, they make sort of assessments, and estimates on those properties that aren't fully assessed in every year. That being said, as you know, and you may recall from our conversation last year, that we had a very large PTAB case with the, actually this was in the circuit court, but with UPS, where they initially had 6 years where they wanted $2 million worth of refunds from us. And so our attorneys were able to negotiate that down to about 10% of that, it was a little over $200,000, and so that's a huge savings to us. So here, the PTAB cases are the same types of things, and so essentially what this resolution does is it says that, yes, District 204 wants to intervene in these cases, which we do, and then secondly, it appoints Franzik as our attorney for these cases. And again, that example of UPS is kind of extreme, but nonetheless, it gives you a look at why we do this and why we get involved in these. If we didn't get involved in that, UPS would have received that $2 million refund. That would have come right out of our current year revenue. So even though those were dating back to 16, 17, 18, those years, that would have come out of this year. And we would, and in addition to any of the other refunds, we would have had that large $2 million refund. And so that's really the purpose of this resolution, to say, yes, District 204 wants to intervene in these cases at the PTAB level. And yes, we've appointed Franzik PC, the law firm, to do that for us, which I think is a good idea. And
Yep.
so we would ask the board to approve that resolution on Monday night as well.
We do that every year.
Every three.
Every three.
It's
Sorry.
every three.
I'm like,
Yeah,
it sounds familiar though. Yep.
we do.
Okay.
Again, we do it in line with that triennial
Right.
piece.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. Any
Okay.
questions? Good. I got a lot next.
Yeah, so if there's no other questions, we'll close the Finance Committee meeting at 8:26, and then we'll start facilities at 8:26, if everyone's okay with that.
Yeah, I think a few people may have to scoot.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
All
no
right.
problem.
thanks.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave
You're
in
out
like
too?
10 minutes or
Okay,
so.
all right, great, thanks, Son. Lots on facilities.
Yes, okay. The good news is, this is the second time we've seen this, except for a couple of items, right? And so, on page 52, you have really a list of items there that we talked about back in June, as far as capital projects for the buildings for the summer of 2022. There have been two additions to this. And so if you look on lines 3 through 22, you would see, and those were in yellow when I did them in color, but obviously you see here, they're kind of a lighter gray color, right? Line 3 through 22. So those would be the recommended projects for the summer of 2022. The two additional projects are on line 20 and line 22. I know I had mentioned to you that we were gonna add this one, which is the sealing and painting of the track at Bennett Field. That typically is something that you do about every 10 years, and we are due for that at this point. And then also, line 22. We have this leak that is affecting the north campus at the north end of the facility, just west of exit 5. So as you come in exit 5, if you look to the right, there's a leak in the building there that is causing damage to classrooms there and also the tunnel. And so we are looking at having to essentially excavate areas around the building, waterproof, and repair any of those damaged areas, and then obviously go back in, and fill the dirt back in, all that sort of thing. The trouble with this project is there are mature trees out there that are gonna probably have to go in this process. Ultimately though, we have to get the water leak fixed. And if you look at the tunnel, you can see where there's actually water that is causing damage to that area. And so, again, the unfortunate part is that we're gonna have to probably go through and remove some of those trees out there, but I don't really see that we have a choice in this situation. Obviously, we can replant the trees when we're done. They're not gonna be as mature, and it's gonna take some time for them to mature in the fashion that they're out there right now. But that being said, so those were the two additional projects that we looked at. Really, the majority of this work is tied up in sort of maintenance items, right, that when you look at those. But a good portion of the dollars are tied up on lines 6, 7, and 8, right, which is where we have HVAC units that either have to be replaced or that we want to add to the facilities. So let me just kind of refresh your memory on those. We have 9 air handling units in the field house here at North Campus. They are original. 3 of them, and when I say original, I think that's, Ray, what is that, 1950?
No, the field house was 1970, those appear to be 1968, 1969 models.
Okay, so roughly 1970. And I know that's at least 50 years old because I just celebrated a birthday not that long ago. And so those are really at the end of their useful life. The 3 that we have, there's 3 that are kind of working, the other 6 are okay, but you know, it's time to really look at replacing those. And so the thought process here with this particular project is that we would replace those 9 air handling units with 2 rooftop units that would also supply air conditioning to the facility. Now, just to be clear, this isn't 70 degrees if there's 5,000 people in the facility, right? It might be 80 degrees if there's 5,000 people in the facility. But for the normal classroom, as far as, you know, PE classes being in there, summer events, those types of things where you have, you know, 300 people in there, it's going to be great. So that's I just wanted to be clear on that. And so that's one of the projects. We anticipate that probably being close to $2 million, essentially. We could go back in with 9 air handling units, and it'd probably be about $1 million to $1.2 million. So let's call it half of what we, you know, close to half of what we see there. It just doesn't make any sense to me at this point to replace those and not have the air conditioning in the facility. Sure, it's going to cost more. There's no doubt about it, right? So that's a recommendation there. Additionally, we have the recommendation to replace I think there's 23 unit vents left in the B wing at South Campus. And when I say replace them, that means we replace them with unit vents that have air conditioning coils in them and will be ready for air conditioning. At that point, Ed and Paul, I believe we would have all of B wing ready for air conditioning, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So we've done, over the last number of years, we changed out univents in, I think it was about 12 classrooms apiece in prior years, and those are ready to go. Last year we did 12 of them, and so we'd be looking to change out the additional 23 here at this point. And then we would be adding also a cooling tower chiller to the facility as well. So that would then supply the air conditioning to that B wing. And you know, we've really targeted B wing because we've heard multiple times that's the hottest wing in the campus, in the facility. And so that's really why we've targeted that area. Again, let's keep in mind that while this is roughly $4 million worth of cost here, we have $3 million worth of grant money to use, right? So we have roughly $2 million from the ESSER grants, the federal grants, the federal stimulus grants, and then we have a $1 million grant coming from the state of Illinois. I've had some recent communication with the state of Illinois regarding this because we've had the application sitting out there. It's probably been, I think it was probably since March, April of this year. We've not heard anything back from them as far as a formal approval. But they did say, you know, I said, look, what if we, first of all, I said, what if we move forward with the project because we want to get it done for, you know, the summer of '22. They said, you can do that, and we can backdate any expense claims from July 1st of 2020 to them. So that won't be an issue because we're well within the window past that July 1st date. The other piece of that is I said, we've not officially been given the okay for the grant. And I said, so what are the chances that we somehow would not receive the grant? And I was told we were 99.5% sure we would be receiving the grant. So in my mind, I think it's worth it to kind of move forward with this based on that, you know, that communication with the state of Illinois. We'll receive the grant. I would assume that it would be sometime within the next fiscal year. Again, it's not 100%, but I think we're in a pretty good place. And at the end of the day, if we end up spending $1.3 million on the cooling tower chiller, and we're able to cool that B wing, and we never get the grant, is that the worst thing on the planet? No, it's not. So, but I do think we're going to be in the position to get that grant. I really do.
Brian, what's the next AC area after what we're doing here?
That's a good question. Haven't gotten there yet. We can take a look at that and kind of talk through where we would want to go and what we would want to do. I think that, may fall in line, with, one of the challenges, quite frankly, when we look at the air conditioning is the cost and the time, right? Retrofitting these buildings for air conditioning isn't a June, July, August project. It's typically a project that is going to go out for some extended period of time. Even this project, the thought is that over at South Campus, the B Wing, we would potentially bid this, and I can let Ed and Paul talk a little bit about the bidding timeline, but we would bid it, and then we may start in February, because a lot of the work with the cooling tower and the piping in the tunnels can be done during the school year. We just can't rip unit vents out of a classroom until we get to June, but that would be sort of that last part of that, right? So even that's probably an 8-month process, that if we didn't have that, those outside facilities to work on, would make this a lot more difficult than what it otherwise would be. And then there's the money factor, right? When I came here, I was basically told by the board at the time, and of course this can change, but they basically said, look, we're not deficit spending to keep going through, our expenses. And so really, what we've kind of done is set up a situation where we say, look, we're saving some money on an annual basis, which is a good thing, and now we can put some of it back into these projects. So going back to the thought on where we're actually, the next piece would be, we would have to take a look at a couple of items, right? The timing. So what do we want to air condition? How long is that project going to be? And is it feasible that we can get it done? Is it parts of 2 summers? How does that work? And then where are the finances coming from? That's the other part of this. Because as you see, even, air conditioning, it's not cheap. That's for sure. It's not cheap. And so it's one of those items that we haven't looked at where the next one is yet, because the thought on this is that this would be the summer of '22. Anything in the future we would be doing in the summer of '23 at the earliest. I've kind of looked at this and said, I think for the summer of '23, we're gonna kind of need to focus on some roofs, because we don't have any roofs in this particular package right now, but we're gonna probably have to do that in the summer of '23. Then again, we have the conversation of, are we looking to, at that point, is the money going to be there to spend $3 million on additional air conditioning? Probably not. So where does that funding come from? Are we looking at, we have a bond issue coming up in '23, '24, potentially, if the board chooses to do that. And then we have our reserves. And so that's really where that money is available and that we can use.
I'd really like you to look at the next opportunity for AC right away, and just have, I don't know where you guys, I'd like to see the next opportunity, and I'd like to just get to moving this along, because if we wait until the bond, we're just pushing this out, and I know it's a timing issue and the work to be done, and I think we need to start looking at accelerating that.
Yeah, I
those
think the air
projects.
conditioning is a priority. It has, I think, at least from my perspective, I think, and from our hearing from the community is that the air conditioning is a big priority
Yeah.
for these buildings. And, especially if we're gonna probably find ourselves in flux with mass situations and things like that. It's just,
gotta get it going.
it's something that has to be done.
Yeah.
I'd love to see where the next, and see what
So,
we can.
to
what
your
we can-
point, then we do need to talk about, what does that mean to timing? Because if we are gonna actually have an effect on this and make a difference for, say, next summer, we know the ship sailed for this summer. What is feasible for us to do? Let's talk about the money, and let's talk about the timeline on
Yeah.
that. I think we might need a separate discussion on that,
Yeah.
to talk through air conditioning, or I don't know, because I know it's a big,
Yeah, look,
Is the board thinking on top of what has been presented in terms of, the plan for the recommendation for next summer as Brian presented, is there an interest in going above and beyond that?
Yes.
Is that,
I think.
Well, and also just to have this in a plan. So you asked the question in June, what's our goal? Is our goal right now we're 50%. So you asked the question, how do we get to the next 50%?
Right.
And is our goal to have 100% air conditioning? And I just think we need a plan that can be worked, that we can look at, we understand the financials, and then we figure out how to work it into a multi-year plan, where the gains are along the way. I think that's the missing piece. Question about what we're doing for the summer of '22, does that allow us to bring those additional classrooms online with air conditioning?
Yeah.
For fall of 2022?
I think that would be the goal.
Yeah, okay. I mean,
Yeah, that would be the goal.
So-
Now, the architects can kind of tell you, look, the construction industry right now has been upside down at times, right? Yeah, and so the thought process is that, we would go to bid for these projects. So really in looking at these projects, we're asking the board right now to say, look, we're gonna create the bid specifications for
Right.
them, right? So the pricing that you see here
Right.
is
May change.
estimated.
Right.
Right? And so, just from month to month, things have gone, in completely different directions in terms of, shortages right now, all that sort of thing. So really what we're looking for the board to do would be to say, look, we're gonna bid these projects. We would probably couple, multiples of these projects together. So we would have, single contracts for, maybe 3 or 4 of these, or, however it works out. But then what we would do is before we go forward, we then bring all of that back to the board and say, look, here's what the formal bids are. Here's what we had estimated, here's what the actual costs are.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, sometimes they're better, sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
And in this current market, I think it's gonna be difficult to predict that.
Yeah, well, I think with respect to the air conditioning, and when I say multi-year, and I hear what you're saying, and I hear what you're saying, and we've heard a lot from the community, until we really understand what the full scope of the project is, to bring us, from 50% now to 75% to 100%, what are the costs associated? It's hard to say. If we could do more, do we want to do more? But once we have,
And what, right, will it take
yeah,
us to do that?
once we
Sure.
have that information in front of us, I think we could have a really good conversation, determine, are we willing to go
Right.
into reserves? How do we fund
Right.
this? The bond issue coming up.
We
where,
have the plans, you guys did an exhaustive survey of the buildings, so we have that
Yeah.
information where we need it, so now we need to really look at the full scope of that,
Yeah.
to make
So-
it happen, to get it back up to that 100% at both campuses.
Right.
And this, I don't know if this was said earlier, but the number of classrooms that this would include next summer would be about 40-ish, right, Brian?
Yeah, I think that's right. That's
So
what
this, the
we're-
Right,
plan that was
additional?
presented would add
Right,
about
40
40-ish
additional.
classrooms of air conditioning.
Yeah, we'd be bringing online
South
about
campus.
40 more classrooms
That's-
of air
that's-
conditioning, which is
good
a good,
start.
that's a good step.
That's a good
It
start.
is,
Step in
yeah.
the right direction.
Sorry that I
So
threw
Brian,
Okay,
question-
thanks,
Thanks,
Don.
Don.
Question for you on how this, with the bidding and everything, approving this, I would like to see more aggressive on the air conditioning, and I would like to, see that next step. And if, I would love to consider it for that next summer. Again, I understand construction and timing and
Yeah.
all that stuff, but if we were to do that, do we need to approve that with this in order to combine the bids?
No,
Okay.
because we would do that next year at this time.
So,
I-
for the bids though, to go out to bid, do we need, if, let's say, and I'm completely making this up, the next AC thing, would we, if we wanted to do it, also, would we wanna combine the bids?
You mean like pull what's listed here and put it into the big picture, is what you're saying?
No,
I think,
so,
Alice, I think what you're saying is, so this, as presented this morning, we're asking the board to approve this money. You're saying if we want to expand that, does it have to be in?
does it have to be a
Oh,
part of?
For
this?
next, for
Because
summer
If
2022?
it's AC stuff, is going out to bid, wouldn't it have all of that together?
Let me ask this question. Let me ask this question. So, we have the work here for the summer of '22.
Yeah,
Are you talking about work that would be done in the summer of '23?
no, 22.
22.
It would have to, yeah, if we were gonna do it, it would have to go into this.
Brian, can I?
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Ed.
So, so you can approve whatever's here now, and if you're trying to make a decision, if you want to add more, we can add more. We'll hit a point of no return eventually. I would like to say, I wouldn't want to delay that work another month.
Got it.
So we could get, if you say Monday, you say go on this, we'll get started on that part, doing our survey work, getting that all going, and then the following month, you say, we want to add X amount more rooms. We can roll that into there and make that part of this
Yeah,
package.
that
Right,
would be,
that's
that
what I
would be
was-
huge,
Yeah.
right. We just don't want to wait a whole nother cycle to be looking at how. we're
Understood,
gonna
and,
flesh this
and
out.
for us, to the timing he's speaking of, there's 14 to 16 week lead times on equipment right now. It used to be 6 to 8 weeks. And that's after it's ordered, which means that's after it's designed, bid, shop drawings, all that, so.
Well, then even more sooner than later. we can-
Yeah, that's the point. We want to try and get these bids out back before Christmas if possible, and then allow some of that winter work to take place,
good.
January, February, and have time to order the units and have them here on site when summer hits.
So should we be having an extra meeting on discussing potentially?
Or would we have it at September facilities?
That's
Well, we're
fine.
gonna have a
It'd be-
committee. Yeah, we'll have
it'd be the
committee of the
Septem-
whole.
It would come up in September.
I guess what I'll say to South Campus specifically, because we're running to B-Wing, that's sort of our longest route. So this main pipe is going in that we'll be tapping into. For what I would think C-Wing would be probably the one that makes next in line, just because it kind of goes right through there. We would be able to pretty quickly add unit vents and just tap that line. We'll hit a point where we have to add another chiller for it to actually, because that load will increase. But it'll be a lot easier moving forward because the main infrastructure piece will be going in as part of this project.
It's good to know.
That is good.
And in terms of equities and percentages and all that, you're about 50% here. When this project is done at South Campus as it stands, you'll be about mid-40s%. Same amount of classrooms, I believe, about 56 each, general ed classrooms. It's just you have a few more classrooms at South Campus.
Got it.
So it's getting you very close to parity between the buildings.
But we want it.
We got a long way to go.
You want everything,
Yeah,
obviously.
right,
Yeah,
we
but
want
just-
more.
It's a pretty
As
good
much-
step, but yes,
yeah.
certainly, we'll look at opportunities to add more if that's the direction you'd like to go in.
Got it. That definitely answers my question on that. Thank you.
So it sounds like, and we kind of talked a little bit about this, and maybe it's not practical for the very near term, but some sort of roadmap. And I don't know if that's in your wheelhouse or if we need to engage the architects
It's
to
pretty easy
to collaborate
we have all
on
the
this.
information. It would really be coming down to how much do you want to spend in any given year?
Right.
And then and how many years do you want, or how many years do you want to accomplish it in? And then we can lay out a plan for you very easily.
Yeah, so it
That's-
sounds like we can do it. And it won't take 20 years, I'm guessing. And it's good timing with an upcoming bond issuance, perhaps, to be thinking about these things. I think I would just ask Brian and team to make sure that you're raising other topics and that we're not getting hyper-focused, and I'm not suggesting where, but I'm very interested in air conditioning too, that we're not getting so focused on that to the detriment of, well, now, we told you about
Yeah.
roofs, we mentioned it once, and now there's water in all the classrooms,
Right,
and we've got to
right.
put kids out in trailers for
Yeah.
6 months to, so just helping to keep us balanced, so, the more information, and you present it very elegantly and eloquently each time, but just to make sure you don't have concerns that are kind of boiling up if we're diverting funds or including the formula around reserves and our credit rating and the other components of
Yeah,
of
look,
funding.
and that's a good point. There's a couple of pieces to that I think are worth mentioning. We still have to maintain the rest of the facilities.
Yes.
So it isn't like the roof goes away, it isn't like, those issues. So whatever it is we spend the money on, we still have to continue to spend on those items as well. As you can see, really on this list here that we have, there's, any other number of items that we're gonna have to take a look at. Anything, we would already in this summer of '22, we would already be probably spending reserves of about $2.6 million over the course of the '22 and '23 fiscal years, okay? So anything that we would add to this is going to come generally from reserves. That does a couple of things, right? So as you look, our reserves, first of all, the board has a policy in place that says we want to try to, and we're not gonna, I don't think we would be encroaching upon that, but we'd have to take a look and see, where we would be. Secondly, you have, generally bond ratings, and one of the bond rating, when we go out to the bond, is the district is currently AAA rated. One of the factors they look at is how much do you have in reserves to cover, any sorts of, it's not so much about the capital issues, but it's more about, look, if the state of Illinois somehow doesn't pay you for a year, can you operate,
But
with
we're
that?
well above that right now.
We are, all of that's true. There's that rating. There's also the factor that the more reserves that we spend, the less investment income we have, right? Because that's now going away as we spend those dollars. And then finally, our financial rating from the state of Illinois, a couple of the factors are based on that number as well, how much we have in reserve. So I'm not telling you that that's not the right way to go. I'm just simply saying, these are the other factors that we have to consider when we look at that from a financial perspective. I think the other thing too is that we can certainly look at adding additional air conditioning. And I'm hearing some, I guess what's the right term for it? We want to kind of kick this up as far as the timeline goes. But I don't know, I'd have to talk to Ed. Realistically, Ed and Paul, I think realistically we're, Ed, is it reasonable to say 5 years from now we could have the rest of the facility air conditioned? What does that look like? I don't know, and I don't know if you know the answer to that question at
Yes.
this point either.
That would be reasonable to say.
Yeah.
We could do it. There
So,
may be
I
some
mean-
aggressive summers, but yes.
Yeah, and so that combination of time plus the amount of money we want to spend, kind of what I said earlier, is really what's going to drive this. And then also the fact that, look, we're going to have to look at other projects as well. So if we decide, hey, look, we're gonna spend $10 or $15 million on air conditioning, sure, we can do that, but then there's also the other projects that we have to maintain also.
Right.
And again, I don't want anybody walking out of here, like you said, just from this conversation, thinking that 3 years from now we can be fully air conditioned, because that probably isn't going to happen. It's going to be a matter of, because we're so limited, really in classroom demolition to 3 months at a time, not even really 3 months. I mean, this year was really 2 months and about 2 weeks. So we're limited to those weeks in the summer. And then any work we can do outside, that's great, we'll do that. But really, it's the classroom piece that you can't demo classrooms in March, right? You have to have those up and operational. And so I think, while we can add to it, I think there's other factors we have to consider. And again, I don't want anybody thinking that, well, hey, look, 2 years from now we can be fully air conditioned, or 3 years we can be fully air conditioned. Because reasonably, with retrofitting the buildings, that's not going to happen. So that's not to say we can't make strides toward it.
Right.
You know.
No, just seeing a plan, I
Okay,
think is
so,
helpful.
yeah, I think we're
That's the
hearing that
plan.
we need to focus on what that long-term strategy is gonna look like to make it happen. If it's gonna take 5 years, what does that look like? And how, Brian, does that impact? What are our funding options for being able to cover that? What makes the most sense
Yeah.
fiscally for
Well,
us to do that?
Essentially, we have two options coming up. We have the bond issue in 23, 24, depending on when we sell the bonds. That's one issue, or that's one option. And then the fund balances. That's it. Those are the two opportunities that we have. Technically, I guess there's a third one, which is, the bad word, the R word, a referendum. But, that certainly is an
The R
option
word,
to run a
yes,
referendum and say, look, we're going to ask the community to increase, the property taxes so we can fund the air conditioning, which, again, that's an option,
Yeah.
right? That's probably the one that's, I don't want to say least reliable, but you're waiting on a vote for that to happen, and then see if that actually occurs, and then how much, you're,
And that wouldn't even come up, we have to do that in an election year, and I think when's the next year?
yeah.
I mean, I'm recalling we had a bit of a surplus last year in a year where estimating the budget was,
Right.
anyone's guess. It was tough, right? So much variability last year. I think you've described earlier in the meeting, there is a bit of variability going into this
Oh,
year.
yeah, in every budget there
always
is.
will be.
No doubt.
I think, maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth, Allison, but I think part of what you might be recalling is, hey, we had some surprise excess as we went through a very strange last year. It'd be, I don't know how we'd feel if we got halfway through the school year and found, we're running at a surplus rather than a deficit. We could have, gotten the bids out and done a little bit more work. We might have a little remorse that we didn't push a little harder to do work. I would just ask that if it's, efficient, cost-effective to tap into a bit more, that we get an understanding of what that pricing would be, just to try to take advantage of the B-wing work going on
Well-
and evaluate that.
One thing that we could do, Brian and everybody is, like I said, there's a certain capacity that the chiller can have. We're planning on B-Wing as part of this. We will find out how many more units we can have until that is maxed out. We can go ahead and bid that as an alternate piece. And then if you decide you want to do it, you can do it. And if you don't want to do it, it's designed and ready to go for the next phase. But that way, it's just rolling in that direction, if that's something you're interested in.
That would essentially compare to what we've already planned for, the 40-ish numbers. You're saying we could see
there-
what else
yeah,
that
say-
chiller
Say
can
we can get
accommodate.
another 5 classrooms on there before that chiller's maxed out. We'll just include those in the package as an alternate, and if you guys decide it's worth spending another $150,000 or whatever the number is,
Financial
then
impact
you
of
can.
that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And Julie, to your point, kind of going back to what you said, well, if you have a year that develops better than what you had thought, it isn't necessarily about, well, we could have pushed harder in that year, then you can spend it the next year.
Absolutely.
Right, I
It
mean-
doesn't go away.
Right, yeah, right. It
Yep.
doesn't leave us. So you always have that opportunity then to look at it the following year, which I kind of feel is a better option, than saying, let's try to jam it all into this year. And, oh, shoot, we have a $2 million deficit that we didn't anticipate.
Right.
Versus, okay, we have $1 million surplus this year, we can spend it in the following year.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, I think some of that surplus was built into this,
Yeah.
It is.
into this
It
number
is,
now
it is.
for the
It's not-
2022 project.
Right.
Yeah, we're taking advantage of, for next summer, we're taking advantage of that excess and the grant funds, and so
Right.
we're spending much more next summer than we
What we normally
typically
would.
have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Typically,
I'm
we're,
more looking at the timing
Yeah. I know.
versus the dollars, and obviously two different things, but the timing is what I'm looking at and taking advantage of.
Right,
So,
Sure.
right, just not missing a window of an opportunity
Correct.
somehow to have included something and then say, oh, well, it's just not feasible because we missed a window to be
Correct.
looking at the production costs and then the actual, units and stuff themselves.
Yeah.
Because it takes so long to order them, to Ed's point, so. Okay, so,
one other, can I ask you another question about these? And it's just a refresher of what the life safety survey work of the 500 to $1 million?
Yeah.
Can you just refresh me?
Yeah.
I'm sure I know
So-
what I'm talking about.
every 10 years, the district goes through a life safety survey, right? And the architects typically perform that for us, and then they point out things in the building that, are typically related to what they have the life safety survey. So let me give you an idea of some of the things that are on there typically. So you would see replacement of doors, replacement of door closers. You would see, they will find areas in the building where, okay, you should probably have another fire alarm strobe here. You should have another toll station here. Those types of things. Look, the building's been functioning as it has been for, 100 and some odd years, right? And so we take those, and then we take that list, and then we kind of go through it and see what can we do without, sort of these large contracts in place. And so we've done that, and now we're going back and saying, okay, we want to, knock off some of these life safety items. We'll be due for another life safety survey in 2013, that would be incorrect, 2023. And so we'll see, look, there are some items on the list that, they're there, and it's going to be difficult to get to them unless you run another project. So, for example, one of the items they talk about in some of the classroom spaces, the walls don't go all the way to the ceiling, right? And unless you're doing an HVAC project, you're tearing apart the ceilings, you're probably not going to get to those because it's going to be too costly otherwise to do that. So those are the types of things that you would see on those lists. And like I said, in 23 we will have another one, and it'll be refreshed, and we'll look at all of that then. So we're just kind of trying to knock some of those items off of
So
this
it's just
list.
like a miscellaneous, it's,
I wouldn't say it's miscellaneous. I mean, certainly there's some, thought that, hey, look, we have these items, we want to accomplish those, right? Some of them, though, like I said, are just items that are we going to get to them? We may and we may not, depending on what other projects we're running, because otherwise it's just, again, that's another set of items that we're looking at to say, okay, how do we work these in as well, in terms of what our finances will allow? Because in addition to those, we still have all of these other items, right? And so that's how we look at those. And so we will, like I said, we'll look at these, And we'll give the board a report in terms of, you know, this is sort of a general number here to say, okay, here's the things we're gonna knock off that list, and then we'll give the board a report on those as well.
So once we get that number back, it will be more itemized than life
Yeah.
safety? It'll be more
Yes,
like
absolutely.
we're doing.
Yeah, it's just based on our list of the life safety items that were recommended, and so we will go through those, see what we can get into this sort of pool of money, and then we'll let, you know, the board know, obviously, of what those items are gonna be.
Gotcha.
So this isn't necessarily like we're gonna spend this direct amount. First, we're gonna have this survey done, and we have to pay for that.
No, the survey's already done.
Okay,
So we had one done, that was done in 2013.
right.
So
You were
that,
saying it was coming up again.
you're right, so it'll be coming up again, it's due every 10 years.
Okay.
So it's stuff from the old survey.
Right.
That we're still knocking off things from that
Okay,
list.
okay, and so, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out why, what this amount is for then. That's gonna, these dollars that cover what's from the 2013?
Not all of it, some of it.
Yeah, we need a little more breakdown on that.
So they
So
can go out
essentially
to
what you get
bid
is,
and-
in 2013, you get I'll just call it a monster list of items that need to be taken care of.
Right.
And we devote so much money each year to knocking that off over a 10-year
Right.
period.
And-
I mean, I don't know if you have
Yeah.
the original,
But
the
I
original
guess
figure for
in
2013.
10 years, we
was-
still have anywhere from 500
Yeah.
to $1 million of work to do?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I can elaborate on it a little if you like.
Ah.
So basically what it is, they're code violations related to
Yeah.
life safety, right? They're categorized A, B, C, you know, what's an immediate thing, what's kind of something you should get done in the next 3 to 5, and then a
Sure.
5 to 10. So generally, you guys have been trying to tackle most of the A things, that's a lot of what's been done.
Yep.
I think the total dollar amount was approximately 3.4 million of work between all the buildings when it was originally done. I believe you guys have knocked off close to $1 million of that, so leaving around 2.4 million or so left to do. And so I think the thought here is just allocating a certain dollar amount to take out a chunk of that, you know, this year. So we would look at whatever priority A items might be left and whatever things kind of make sense to group together to make a project that's feasible to bid. Generally, you've been doing them in-house.
Who does the safety survey?
That's, we are required to walk through, you have to have an architect go through, and basically, you go through and there's particular codes that you have to check to see
Right.
if things are violating. Theoretically, once you do it once, and if you do everything, the next time you go through, unless you've done stuff to your building that you shouldn't be doing, it should be done. So hopefully, as we get closer to the 23 survey, when you come back through, most of the stuff is complete, and then you're not doing anything else.
But having 10 years between it makes me think that you're probably not, because I would imagine some compliance things change and things like that too.
Generally, if you're doing stuff
Along the way, you're
along
up
the
to
way,
date.
and then,
Code, okay.
yeah, and if everything we do is to code when we do it
Right,
now.
right,
It'd just be
right.
like if some random thing happened in-house that maybe needs to get adjusted, but
Okay, so what exactly then are we approving in here? Just as the lump sum, or for you to give us what we're, the detail
Yeah,
right
there's
now?
no dollar amount we're approving
Right,
at all.
okay.
We're simply approving the projects there.
Right,
That
right.
would be, you know, the bid process
Yep.
for the projects. Then we'll bring those back, I don't know, Ed, what are we looking at timeline, December, January?
should be able to give you a recommendation as to what we're looking at for the next meeting for specific projects.
No, I'm talking about for these projects here, bidding, having bid
Bidding all-
numbers.
Okay. Yeah, I'm hoping to have bids back by Christmas.
Okay,
For the
so-
life survey stuff?
for all of
All-
it,
for all
Everything
of
if
it.
possible.
for all of it.
Okay,
Yeah,
Okay.
for all of it. So, and then we would reevaluate and decide, okay, look, are we gonna go forward with these? I mean, you know, you have a project for $2 million estimated, it comes in at 3.5. I don't know, we'll have to take a look at that and
Right,
see. And then
right.
that's where we rely on Ed and Paul to say, look, this particular issue in the market is causing this increase right now. You may wanna wait another time because we don't think that $3.5 million is the actual value of the project, all of those types of things.
okay. All right, so we'll bring this on Monday night to review the going out for bid.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And then we would approve those projects to go to bid and go for it.
Right, right. Anyone else have any questions?
No.
Okay. I think we're good, guys. 9:04. We'll adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul and Ed. Good to see you again.
Everybody.
Great day.